Okay, I'm going to get started. My name is Don Bowman. My company is Agilicus, and we make secure zero trust remote access for industrial control systems and very specifically focused on the wastewater industry where most of our customers are. And today I'm going to talk about cybersecurity on a budget. And I'm going to talk about what that means, and I have a pretty good knowledge of how wastewater treatment plants budget or don't budget for things like security or things that smell like IT. We'll talk a little bit about why there's a budget crunch, the difference between OPEX and CAPEX budgets, where there's big CAPEX budgets spent infrequently and very small OPEX budgets spent ongoing on things that would be maintenance and upgrades and security. We're going to talk about what cybersecurity might mean in terms of multi-year versus multi-day priorities. We often lose sight of the fact that we're looking for perfection for 2 years out, and that means we don't work on something today that makes things a little bit better. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the skill set gap and how the adversaries are getting more skilled, more talent at a faster rate than we have as defenders to defend against that. And then I'll talk about the business case. What's the business case for cybersecurity? It has to come down to dollars and cents. Where do you find the return on investment? Where do you find that money? And some of the different levers that exist there. So the situation is, I think that probably each person on the call has a different situation, but collectively you have the same situation. It's something along the lines of my plant was refreshed in 2008. I got a set of old desktop PCs that have floppy drives in them that are running Windows 2008, that are driving PLCs that literally have no security model at all, that are in turn driving HMIs that use VNC, and you can use without a password or the 8-character password that it allows. My firewall's old enough to vote might not be literally accurate for some of these. At least one of my customers that was true for, but they're usually a little bit out of date. They're usually near the end of their lifetime. There's no software updates for them. And that's a concern because it's one of your key security components and you're kind of letting it float there. Usually the security model is an air gap, so outside bad, inside good. And the idea is that there's no way to get across that air gap. And then over the last decade, there's all kinds of things that have found their way across that air gap. So there's a proxy server because this device needs a license manager in order to operate. There's some sort of shared network that sits in the middle that your staff or your vendors or somebody can get into and then jump onwards with a jump box, or maybe there's a cellular modem hanging around in there or TeamViewer or something like that. As a consequence, that air gap, whether it was a good security model or not, it's certainly not showing its best here. And the OPEX budget, other than salary, is low. I mean, we're not talking about people that are budgeting like new SaaS companies do, where everything is OPEX. This is an all CapEx business. And then I put the all tells me the all are coming. You can fill in the words for all. The government, the newspaper, the tea leaves are telling me the Russians are coming, the cyber criminals are coming, the whatever. But you're hearing every 2 minutes that we are the top risk critical infrastructure. And we're seeing it in the news. We're seeing hacks against Oldsmar Water. We're seeing hacks against the one in Pennsylvania with the HMI that was hacked, and so on. And people are worried here. They're worried that this is an area they don't really understand the risk in. If the whole control system goes down, what does that mean? Well, there's safety PLCs. Does it go into bypass? What does it mean exactly? But they just know that it has a lot of risk areas in it. And then every 10 minutes, you're getting some security bulletin, the CVE XXX with priority YYY. And you're like, I don't even know if I have this or not. It says Rockwell Automation. I know I run some Rockwell. Which PLC do I have? Which version is it? How do I match it? Oh, wait, there's another CVE comes in. And then it doesn't matter, because what am I going to do with that? It's not like I'm going to take the plant down and upgrade these, because scheduled downtime, it's not a thing. So that's the situation. We all share it. We understand it. We accept it. We don't like it. We move on. One of my favorite metaphors, it's a bit sad on the frog, but is about the parable of the boiling frog. The idea is you put a frog in cold water and slowly warm it up, and the frog's like, this is really comfortable, and all of a sudden, or slowly and gradually, the frog's like dies. Versus if you drop a frog into boiling water, it tries to get out. So here we've got this problem. After 20 plus years of pretending, we have to face facts. The industrial control systems we have are really no different than the things in the IT part of the company. They have IP addresses, they have risks, they have needs, they have security, they have operating systems. They're not simple thermostats anymore. We kind of pretended that they were not these complicated distributed control systems that use software libraries and did RPC and stuff. We pretended that they were really just sort of more advanced thermostats. It's not true. So over the years, we've grown from that being true to being totally untrue, and there's been no sense of urgency created suddenly because of the boiling frog effect. And you see it all over. You see things like my building management system has a license manager, so it needs cloud access, thanks. And that's on all the cameras and the door locks, but the door locks are on the same network as the control system, and because that's how we did it, and you've got big data. Somebody's like, well, we can save XYZ amount of chemicals and be more compliant and this and that and the historian and the cloud, and we just need all the data to go to the cloud in real time with zero latency, thanks. And you're like, well, that plant has a cellular modem with about 3 nines of uptime. I wonder what that's going to mean. Offsite backup, these are obviously good things, but they are not really architected in from the start. In a wastewater treatment plant, as a consequence, now that we're trying to budget for cybersecurity and people are pushing these needs, they're impacting the intrinsic security that exists there now. We're finding there's more and more unique skill sets. So it used to be that a relative generalist would show up with a screwdriver and be able to do the whole thing. And now you've got very detailed programming in the HMI, and there's tuning on this, and the VFD has this, etc. So you have multiple people needing to come and go, and commissioning is now a cast of thousands, a teamwork job rather than just one person shows up and knows everything. The downside to that is cost. You have more travel, more people, and sometimes the right person's not available, and they're on the phone and going back and forth, and inevitably they need real-time access to it sporadically during that commissioning phase. And it's inefficient to do via a truck roll, and it's insecure to do it with the existing air gap traversal models. Each of these have risks, each of the changes have costs, and they're hidden elsewhere. When we're putting the budget together, we're going to go try to find those hidden costs and risks and talk about them. We're already spending that money. Now we're going to reduce the amount we spend there and increase it somewhere else. So let's first talk about modeling cost. Budget's about cost, right? And one of the biggest things in cost that's interrelated is risk. Risk and money are very tightly related. Ask any casino and their roulette wheel. They understand for you, it's the chance of winning. For them, it's the risk of you winning. Insurance companies hire actuaries, and they figure out the risk that you lose a little finger and what that's worth to a professional piano player over their life. They set an insurance premium. How likely are you to get your 1995 Honda Civic stolen versus your whatever? Risk is money. All right, so if you can reduce risk, it is a value to the organization. Now, the goal is not zero risk. So some people think risk needs to be minimized to zero. It just needs to be moved to an acceptable level. As you start to approach zero risk, your cost heads to infinity. You don't get anything done. You don't start anything new. You're too worried. You put up a gate around everything and stop. That's not the idea. You just need to be in the zone for your organization. You have to accept some risks, have controls on others, and manage others. So there's all kinds of risks. There's reputational risk. Is my name going to be in the news in a bad way? There's fines. We're getting fined. There's the concept of, well, we managed the risk, but we had a bunch of overtime. These are all costs for you. So, you imagine what's the value today of a 1 in 10 chance of having a week-long automation outage. Nobody really knows what that would cost in a water treatment plant. In some plants, the automation is kind of just there to sort of help things out. And others, they would effectively go into bypass or shut down, and nobody would know what's going on. Nobody really knows because you don't test that, right? Nobody's doing a dry run and saying, next week, let's try it without the automation. Who knows what would happen? It's hard to understand that risk, particularly the further you get away from the plant. You're having to explain things to that actuary or that insurance adjuster, and they don't understand what this means. They just know that they're hearing the news. USA Today says that the Koreans act this, and water treatment plants are very difficult to understand, whether it's versus traditional desktop ransomware, which sadly we've got lots of data points on, and people can understand, okay, you have 19 systems and one's a big ERP and 3 are SaaS. Okay, it's going to cost you XY dollars to get back in business. They don't really understand here because they can't look at that PLC and say, well, what's the backup? And you're like, well, it's 16 kilobyte firmware file, but where is it? Oh, well, it's there on that machine beside it. They don't know what it means. One of the important things when you're building that cost model is understanding what quadrant of this graph you're trying to solve. So imagine two lines. First is motivation. How motivated is the attacker? And the second is skill. How skilled is the attacker? So low motivation, low skill, these are accidents, right? So this is something bad happened and nobody really intended for it. I picked up a USB key in the parking lot and plugged it in. I was curious what was on it. Boom, plant goes down. I plugged my new thing in here. I didn't realize the network was a broadcast loop and, the network went down. These are accidents, misconfigurations, etc. In my experience, my customers in the water treatment plants have very considerable risk in this quadrant. Very considerable. Subnets are often very vague. There's no segmentation in the network. Everything's on a broadcast domain. Something misbehaves, bad thing happens. They're bringing stuff in and out of that network with a sneaker net, with USB keys. Those USB keys can bring in malware from the external network or basically documents downloaded to phishing. And they're bringing into a network that is effectively unpatched. And it has all the same things that are in a traditional IT network. It's going to have ESXi, it's going to have Veeam, it's going to have SolarWinds, it's going to have a SCADA historian sitting on top of Microsoft SQL Server 2012. All of those things are the bread and butter of ransomware gangs. Here they weren't particularly motivated to find you, and there's no particular skill involved. On the high motivation, low skill, I don't see a ton of stuff here. Maybe industrial actions or disgruntled staff. Somebody got fired and did something bad on the way out. But there's not really a lot of script kiddie fame here. This is not really an exciting industry that gets a lot of news. Cybercrime is here. If they pick you off by accident, they're not targeting you per se. They'll come after you and ask for some money. In the lower right, we have things that aren't particularly highly motivated to get after you, but are highly skilled. So supply chain attacks. So supply chain attack is you buy a device and that device inside it has something from another vendor and that has something from another vendor and so on. I did a post the other day on Matryoshka dolls as a sort of metaphor. And, it's kind of surprising to me. Palo Alto had this big security issue a few weeks earlier, but then a few weeks later, Siemens fessed up and said, well, that Palo Alto firewall is embedded in this very industrial looking device that I make. And I'm like, oh, okay, you see that happening. And then the upper right quadrant is the one everybody focuses on, the state actors. North Korea is going to get me, Russia's going to get me. This is very, very difficult to defend against. You think about a few years ago in Iran, they had the enhanced nuclear reactor and they're enriching uranium. And the United States and Israel managed to get a very complicated kill chain in there and then set the centrifuges slightly off balance and destroy it. And they did. It's a very complicated story. You can go see it online. There's some good documentaries on it. But imagine if you were defending yourself against the United States and Israel from a cyber defense standpoint. I just don't think that is a very realistic thing to do for anybody. Iran spent a lot of money on it. That was a proper air gap underneath a hollowed out mountain. There were people with guns around the outside of it. There was no internet in and out. And yet they were able to achieve this by putting something on a USB key and then getting those into the supply chain at the local equivalent of Best Buy and waiting for someone to buy it. And they brought that in their pocket and they put it in a machine in the non-secured part of the network that was just running Windows. And then it was able to wiggle its all the way through until it found these, I believe Siemens or GE PLC is one of those two, and just slightly alter their programming. If that's who you think you're protecting against, you're going to need a lot more budget than the United States. So I think that you need to sort of focus your efforts more on the left edge, maybe both of the left edges there, maybe those three quadrants a little bit, but there's a lot of risk in the lower right. One of the jokes I like to tell, what's your main defense? It's being harder to attack than your neighbor. One of my favorite jokes in this area, it's not very funny, but imagine two hikers out hiking and they come across a bear. One guy bends over, starts tying his shoes really tightly. The other guy says, what are you doing? You can't outrun a bear. He says, no, I just need to outrun you. Well, you just need to outrun your neighbors, right? So if your job is to make sure that your plant isn't attacked, be harder to attack than your neighbor. That's the litmus test we're talking about here. Be harder than the motivation of the person that's going to go after you, and then you'll be maybe okay. The other thing we like to think about is in cost is maintenance. You know what maintenance is like. If you don't keep it up, it gets very expensive. We all had that first car we had as a kid, and we never changed the oil in it, and eventually the engine blew up, right? Or something like that. you drove it like a rented mule or whatever. So maintenance. We like to think that everything in our plant is some special snowflake. This is a really complicated PLC, and there's no downtime. There's no Microsoft Patch Tuesday for it. And we forget there's a bunch of stuff hanging around in the middle that's kind of half IT and half OT. There's a SCADA historian running a Windows 2012 with Microsoft SQL Server. There's an HMI running VNC on a Windows OIT device. There's an industrial PC running Linux. And there's a couple of printers hanging around we print stuff on. There's some Wi-Fi access points, whatever they are. And we don't do any maintenance on those because we have this mindset that, well, we can't do patches, we can't do downtime. I'm like, look, that printer is as dusty as all get out on top of it. I guarantee it wasn't used this week. Why can't you upgrade that printer? It's got this open Wi-Fi hotspot that I can get in through it and get into the network. They're like, oh, we don't patch stuff. I'm like, look, patch that. Stay up to date on those patches and it will help. So coming to budgeting, that if you model that cost of not doing that maintenance and it balloons at the end, you can bring that budget back as much smaller cash flows and it costs less overall. So yeah, downtime's not a thing, but I'm not asking you to take the entire world down. I'm asking you to recognize that your firewall needs to be kept up to date. And if it goes down, your plant doesn't go down. Patches break things. Yeah, they do, but I'm not suggesting every couple of days you upgrade the firmware in the PLCs. I'm suggesting that you keep the things up to date that on this chart are on the left-hand side of it, and then case by case think about this stuff on the right. That's what budgeting is about, is where am I going to spend that cash flow? Is it going to be huge in the future or smaller today? This is a type of debt, right? If undone maintenance is debt, debt is cost. You're either going to pay for it later with interest or you're going to pay for it now without interest. Okay, back to the topic, cybersecurity on a budget. A budget's driven by a need, a cost, a value. You've got a business case, dollars and cents, the almighty dollar, that sort of thing. Whether you call it cost benefit, risk reward, return on investment, it doesn't really matter. So the first thing is you have to think about where am I going to go get that budget? And sometimes it's going to be hidden costs and I'm going to make them unhidden and reduce. But what are the success factors? The first thing is anytime somebody comes in and says, look, I need $1 trillion, I'm going to change the way everything works, it fails. History is littered with big projects like that. One of the ones I had to study in school was the Denver airport, the new baggage claim system, hugely expensive software system, and it never worked. And it was a very busy airport, as most of you know. And it's just they changed the world suddenly and nothing happened. So here, for cybersecurity on a budget, what I recommend doing is finding a project to start with that doesn't really change much. It improves, but it doesn't change. It's not a fundamental rip and replace type model. Be incremental and continuous. Create broad value first. Get a lot of people behind this. Hey, look, my job got a little bit easier. Hey, look at that. Our risk register got a little bit smaller. There's less red ink on it. Lots of people are behind this rather than one person that's in love with it and everybody else is like, I don't know what we're doing this for. Attack those hidden costs head on. I'm going to talk about some of those other hidden costs in a second, but they're there, and a cybersecurity project can reduce those hidden costs. They should be part of your budget because the organization is going to spend less money there, and you really have to spend less money there. You can't just say you will and then let that hidden cost continue. And that's part of this, use other people's money. There's other projects that are in flight that are doing things, and you're going to take that money because it's better. So I've got a specific project in mind, and no real surprise, it aligns with what my company does. We make it really easy to solve secure remote access. Back to that cast of thousands doing commissioning. You want to get that one expert from the factory in for 15 minutes. It's going to be so much easier if you can do it safely, securely, remotely, without them having to install a bunch of software, without doing a VPN. It's going to cause some risk. They're not going to have to fly there, and Hertz and Avis and Delta are involved. That's going to be an expensive versus they just 15 minutes out of their day. So much easier for all. So you've got a lot of users today, and I know you have multiple remote users. Everybody says they don't, but they do. And they do from different avenues: remote support, remote operations, integrators, vendors, simple diagnostics, backup, plant staff, even just plant staff, reduced overtime. If you can make the HMI ubiquitously available, so when somebody's worried something's gone wrong, and an expert can look at it and say, no, we're okay, and they can do that from a tablet on the side of a road rather than driving into the plant, that's overtime. You can simplify and reduce this cost with Agilicus. This is really what we're good at. I'm not going to go into any details on our technology today. I would love to contact you afterwards or have you contact me, do a demo, that sort of thing, and explain in more detail. But just for the sake of this suspend disbelief, I can make it easy and securely for anybody to do the one thing they need and nothing more. And your insurance will love it, and your team will love it. It simplifies your management in the sense that the plant can manage the users. This is a big friction point that we see. The IT team doesn't understand, and therefore they're unwilling to grant access, and they're the ones that are involved, and we spend weeks of inefficient going back and forth. This gives you the keys to your kingdom in a safe way that both parties can agree to. The multi-factor risk, reducing that risk overall, that comes down to compliance and insurance. It might be being asked for by your board of directors. It might be being asked for by your insurance carrier. It might be at your management. But if you can put a checkbox in this multi-factor column, your risk is significantly reduced on most things. It's going to reduce pressure on some of those updates. I said earlier, you got to start updating some of the stuff that isn't really critical to the operations, like the firewall. But then also said earlier, somebody on a firewall old enough to vote. There are no updates to that. Having a really simple secure access system in here reduces the pressure on that firewall. Instead of it being asked to do complicated roles like port forwarding and VPN and cryptography, you just say, look, block everything in. Firewalls, when you block everything, it's really hard to get that wrong. It's as soon as you have exceptions and rules, it gets hard. And also, you don't need to allow anything outbound except for one IP from our system. Nothing else is needed. That firewall will extend its life, good for budget. Spending other people's money. So everybody has a big data project. It might not have happened yet. It might be happening. It might be, something like that. But everybody's been dreaming the dream of big data and AI and cloud and the fog and all this other stuff. And whether it works or doesn't work for you, not my problem. When it starts to happen for you, and I said when, you are going to be struggling with, okay, I got to send stuff to the cloud. Well, what does that mean? It's not a fixed IP address. If you think Amazon has one IP address and that's what AWS is, you're sorely mistaken. It's millions of IPs and they're all dynamic and they're changing every 10 minutes. So your firewall can't figure it out. There's no way to say only allow outbound stuff on Kafka to AWS. And that's where we come in. We can make that possible. And that allows you to get that project underway without wrecking your security. And people are going to want this to be nearly real time, because they're thinking about predictive maintenance, mean time to repair, etc. So they're not thinking about last month's data. They're thinking about last second's data. And that's where you're going to struggle here. And I think we can really help. So the cybersecurity project as an enabler of this means that there's more budget available because this is the shiny new. This is where we are willing to spend. And Amazon isn't doing this without OpEx. So there's an OpEx budget here. So you just say, look, in order to do this, we need a better way to get data out. And we're not going to open up our firewall. We're not going to do that. So, let's figure it out. And then the other thing is about de-spending other people's money. So there's this concept in the world called shadow IT. The IT team says, look, we don't have a budget this year to do this type of project. So one of the departments says, screw them, I'm going to spend it out of my own budget. And that's how you end up with Dropbox and an organization that otherwise uses Google Workplace. And the same is true for operational technology. A bunch of people make local decisions, and they're not bad people. They're not necessarily bad decisions, but collectively they have a scar tissue of cost. And you have a set of tools, TeamViewer, E1, etc. You're creating users and you're allowing people to do stuff, and there's risk and there's licenses on these tools. And it's all kind of hidden because it's in 95 different line items of 400 different budgets. But a breach there is a breach for all. Everybody owns that risk, but some of them don't know that they exist. On July 4th, TeamViewer had a big wake-up call where attackers got access to fortunately only their corporate infrastructure, we think. But it's an example where, you look for that shadow IT and say, look, if we consolidate this and make it a real thing for everybody, we'll each spend a little bit less. Why do I have 2 cellular modems in here with 2 SIM cards with 2 data plans? It's because 2 different people need to manage it. How are they managing those users? Wait a minute, this one has a bunch of people that haven't worked for us in a decade. This one only has 1 user. I bet you that's shared across, it's shared across all my vendors. Vendor A has an account. Who's vendor A? Well, vendor A is Siemens. How many people work for Siemens? 200,000. How many people were fired today on bad terms? 10. Oh, wait, do they know the password? I don't know. When was it last changed? Never. So de-spending that money, taking the shadow IT out, moving it into a secure remote access story with zero trust, lowers your risk, increases your simplicity, allows those people to get their job done more quickly, and everybody's happy. So we're we're kind of wrapping up here. I haven't got a strong, do this and everything gets perfect thing. Going back to my earlier thing, I don't think you should be thinking about protecting yourself against the United States, the nation state. Certainly do your best in that area, but you're going to find that that is so expensive. There is no budget for it. I think you're going to need to think about those other quadrants, about accidents, about industrial actions in terms of, bog standard ransomware weaseling its way in there. The best way to do it is start with the user. Simple sign-in experience for the user. Everything works the same way for them. They use their existing identity providers. There's no shared accounts. There's multi-factor. Second is each user has specific roles on specific things at specific times, nothing more. So no VPN. This allows you to know, okay, what's the blast radius if that user got compromised? It's this small rather than everything. Having a request acknowledge flow. Oh, this user is trying to do this thing this time. It's okay. I got the safety device on. It's safe. And making it browser only so it works on any device means you don't have to worry about your software on your partner's machines. They hate that. They hate when they have customers that say, I need VPN X on your machines to access me. They're like, I got 50 customers. There's just no way to do that. I can't install 50 different VPNs on my laptop. And multi-factor everywhere, even in the air gap. With that, I will take any questions in the chat if they happen. Otherwise, my team will follow it afterwards with a copy of what we discussed today, and we would love to talk to you and see if there's an opportunity to do some business together. And again, my name is Don Bowman. My email is don@agilicus.com. And if you have any feedback on the presentation, you felt that something was good or something was bad, I'd love to hear from it. Okay, seeing no questions in the chat, thank you very much for your time today. It really means a lot to me. And I hope you don't have any bad cybersecurity experiences in the near future. Cheers.